At 8:14 on a Tuesday morning, a cargo truck in central Kansas rose 6 inches off the road and stayed there. Not launched, not overturned, not caught in a gust. It simply lifted, as if some invisible hand had reached beneath 15 tons of steel and decided weight was suddenly negotiable. 3 states away, in a suburb outside Atlanta, a woman taking groceries from her car felt her knees buckle under a force so intense she dropped the driveway and couldn't stand for nearly a minute. In northern Chile, an observatory technician watched a wrench fall in slow motion, drifting so gently through the air that he thought, for one irrational second, the footage in front of him had frozen. By noon, there were hundreds of incidents. By evening, thousands. The first explanations were the usual ones: faulty sensors, industrial contamination, localized magnetic effects, mass psychogenic response amplified by social media. The words changed every hour, but the pattern underneath them was the same. No one wanted to say the laws of physics were behaving differently in different places on Earth. Dr. Lena Voss said it first, although only in a closed emergency call with the International Geodynamics Council. It isn't equipment failure, she told them. The acceleration values are changing, not everywhere and not uniformly, but changing. Actual local gravitational behavior is diverging from the planetary norm. There was a silence after that, the kind that forms when trained minds all collide with the same impossible thought and reject it at once. Lena was 39, a field physicist by instinct, a systems theorist by necessity, and one of the few people in the world whose work sat at the uneasy intersection in gravimetry, deep Earth imaging, and quantum vacuum modeling. She had spent a decade studying anomalies so small they were barely distinguishable from noise. Tiny fluctuations in measured gravity near ancient cratons. Subtle inconsistencies in underground density maps. Persistent errors in models of how space and matter interacted at planetary scale. Most of her colleagues considered the data irritating but harmless. Lena considered it a wound that had never healed. Now it was open. She worked at the Aster Deep Survey Facility in Iceland, a cluster of black glass structures built against volcanic stone and Arctic wind. The station's purpose had always sounded simple enough: measure the unseen architecture of the Earth with absurd precision. In practice, it meant arrays of superconducting gravimeters, neutrino detectors buried in basalt, quantum clocks synchronized across continents, and a data center that hummed day and night like an enormous restrained animal. When the anomalies began, Lena called in the entire overnight team and never sent them home. There was Noor Al-Khatib, a geophysicist who trusted rock layers more than people and could read seismic data the way other people read weather. There was Matteo Sans, whose specialty was precision timekeeping and relativistic drift. He had joined Aster because he believed time itself was less stable than physics pretended. And there was Yara Chun, a mathematician with the rare ability to move from elegant abstraction to practical terror in a single sentence. By the second day, Earth had divided into zones. Some were mild, a city block where gravity was 2% weaker, enough to make footsteps uncanny, enough to make basketball players jump just a little too high and infants laugh at toys that took too long to fall. Some were catastrophic. A valley in western China where gravity spiked nearly 40% above normal, collapsing roofs, pinning livestock to ground, rupturing blood vessels in people who couldn't escape fast enough. Flights were rerouted worldwide. Elevators became traps. Bridges were closed. Schools shut down. No one knew which regions would change next or whether the changes would hold. And yet the zones were not spreading like disease, nor pulsing like storms. They were appearing in fixed geometries. Lena saw it first on the global overlay. The regions looked random until all irrelevant data was stripped away: population, altitude, geology, weather, magnetic variance. Then a hidden order merged. The anomalies aligned along lines too precise to be natural and too large to be human-made. They formed a lattice, not across the surface exactly, but through it, as though the planet were intersecting a three-dimensional framework whose nodes only occasionally touched human space. "This is impossible," Noor said, staring at the model. "Yes," Lena replied, but it's repeating. The nodes were not centered on cities or fault lines or core mantle boundaries. They were tied to coordinates that seemed to ignore the Earth as matter and treat it instead like a reference frame. The pattern remained stable even when corrected for tectonic drift, precession, orbital position, and local mass distribution. It was as if the lattice belonged to something larger than the planet, and Earth had simply moved into alignment with it. They ran simulations for 30 straight hours. Every conventional explanation failed more cleanly than the last. If it was a geophysical phenomenon, it should have coupled the mass beneath the crust. It didn't. If it was electromagnetic, the clocks should have stayed consistent. They didn't. If it was an instrumentation artifact, independent arrays on 5 continents should not have shown identical phase behavior within nanoseconds. They did. Matteo was the one who noticed the clock drift wasn't collateral damage. "It's leading the gravity changes," he said. Lena looked up from her terminal. "By how much?" He swallowed, recalculating as though the answer might improve under pressure. 112 seconds on average. The relativistic offsets begin first. Then the gravity field diverges. So time changes before gravity does. "No," Matteo said quietly. "Something changes, and time notices before gravity does." That sentence stayed in the room. On the 4th day, government stopped pretending the phenomenon was local. Emergency broadcasts began advising people to monitor regional gravity advisories the way previous generations had watched hurricane maps. Videos flooded every network. A teenager in a low-gravity district stepping off a curb and drifting 10 feet into the air before smashing into a storefront awning. Rescue crews crawling on reinforced harnesses through a high-gravity hospital zone where every movement looked like it was happening at the bottom of an ocean trench. In low-variation areas, life went on with a layer of dread over it, everyone waiting to see if their street would be next. Lena stopped watching the public feeds after a child in Buenos Aires asked a reporter with plain curiosity whether Earth was broken. At Astor, the answer was beginning to look like yes, but not in the way anyone expected. Yara had been exploring the lattice mathematically, treating it not as a field pattern, but as a projection. On the wall display, she rotated the node map through dimensions the eye could barely follow, folding surface coordinates into abstract space. The lines rearranged themselves, then locked into a shape that made the room go still. It was not a network. It was a contour. What am I looking at? Nor asked, Yara zoomed out further. A boundary condition. Lena stepped closer. Yara's voice lost its usual detachment. The anomalies aren't separate events. They're stress points, like ripples forming along a membrane that's being displaced from the other side. The other side of what? Matteo asked. Yara looked at the display, then at Lena, as if embarrassed by the obviousness of what she was about to say. Reality, apparently. No one laughed. The data forced them where language resisted. The Earth was not generating new gravity laws. It was moving through regions where the local expression of gravity, what matter and time agreed gravity should be, was being altered by contact with a deeper structure, something beneath ordinary space-time, not underground in the physical sense. Beneath in the way code is beneath an image or grammar beneath a sentence. For decades, fringe interpretations of quantum gravity had speculated that space was emergent, that the fabric of the universe was not fundamental, but assembled from hidden informational relationships. Most physicists treated the idea with cautious interest and then returned to equations that produced useful results. Lena had always believed emergent models explained too much to be comfortably ignored. Now she was staring at a map, suggesting Earth had drifted against the scaffolding from which space itself was built. The breakthrough came from a place no one expected, a dead neutrino array under the Greenland ice sheet, decommissioned 8 years earlier and left half operational because dismantling it cost more than preserving it. One of its archive channels had activated during the first anomaly. A technician forwarded the corrupted packet to Astor as an afterthought. It wasn't corrupted. It was structured. The signal contained intervals too regular for noise and too information-dense for any natural emission they knew. When Yara translated the sequence into geometric weighting values, the global lattice refined into something terrifyingly coherent. The stress points were not random contacts with an abstract substrate. They were responses to an encoded pattern. Something hidden beneath reality was not merely there. It was active. Lena felt the first genuine fear of her adult life then, not the adrenaline fear of disaster, but the deeper kind, the cold interior feeling that comes when the universe changes category around you. A storm can kill you. An earthquake can erase a city. But both still belong to a world whose rules you understand. This was different. This suggested that gravity, time, and locality were visible behaviors of a system humanity had mistaken for bedrock because it had never before been altered. Matteo spoke what no one else wanted to say. Is someone doing this? Lena answered with equal honesty. I don't know whether someone still applies. They presented their findings to a secured multinational briefing on the 6th day. The officials on the call looked exhausted, lit by bunker lights and sleeplessness. Casualty estimates were already in the tens of thousands. Economies were freezing. Rural populations were evacuating on rumors alone. Several militaries had begun considering whether the anomalies could be weaponized, a fact Lena found both revolting and depressingly predictable. She showed them the lattice, the leading clock shifts, the encoded neutrino pattern, and the emergent model. So your conclusion, one defense minister said slowly, is that the Earth is intersecting some underlying framework reality? Yes. And that framework is changing the force of gravity in localized regions. Yes. Why now? Lena hesitated. There were many things she did not yet know, but this part at least had become brutally clear, because we touched it first. The room stiffened. Astor had been running a classified experiment for 11 months under a coalition Grant most of the team barely understood. Officially, it was a vacuum coherence test designed to improve deep Earth imaging by entangling synchronized clocks with ultra-low energy field perturbations. In practice, it meant nudging the quantum vacuum in exquisitely small ways and measuring whether space-time responded more like geometry or information. Lena had signed off on it because the energy levels were trivial and the theory elegant. Now, comparing the test logs with the onset of the first clock drifts, she saw the sequence too clearly to deny. The experiment had not created the hidden structure, but it had resonated with it, like tapping a wall and discovering it was hollow, then tapping again, harder, until something on the other side tapped back. There was outrage, then demands, then the chaotic bureaucratic theater of people trying to assign blame inside an unfolding planetary emergency. Lena let them spend their fury. None of it altered the data. After the call, nor shut the conference room door and leaned against it, so we woke something up. Lena looked at the live feeds of shifting zones across Europe and the Pacific, or we announced ourselves to a system that was already awake. That night, the pattern changed. For the first time, the nodes synchronized globally. Every gravimeter at Astor dropped into resonance. The floor trembled without seismic motion. Quantum clock skipped, corrected, and skipped again. On the wall display, the lattice brightened into near-perfect symmetry. Then a new signal rose through the noise, not from Greenland this time, but everywhere at once. Every detector on Earth was hearing the same thing through different instruments. Not sound, not language, a recursion, a nested structure repeating across scales, from the timing of neutrino bursts to the spacing of gravitational fluctuations to the harmonic drift of atomic transitions. Yara modeled it in real time, and her hands began to shake. It's not random encoding, she whispered. It's a representational schema. For what? Matteo asked. Yara turned the display. The recursion rendered as layers, layer beneath layer beneath layer, each giving rise to the one above it, each simpler and more abstract than the world it produced. At the lowest visible level was a lattice of relations. Above it, a manifold. Above that, physical constants. Above that, matter fields, chemistry, stars, planets, weather, oceans, cells, minds. Reality was not being described. It was being built. And Earth's anomalies marked places where the assembly rules were temporarily exposed. Nurse stared at the image as though it might blink. This is impossible. Lena almost smiled at the familiarity of the sentence. It stopped caring what we think days ago. Then she saw something inside the recursion, a modulation, a local deviation embedded within the larger pattern, small but deliberate, a reply. The hidden framework beneath reality was not malfunctioning. It was communicating through the only variables humanity had learned to measure precisely enough: gravity and time. Not words. Structure, relationship, instruction. Lena spent the next 14 hours with the team translating the signal into model space, then into physical implications. As the recursion unfolded, a message emerged, not in syntax, but an intent so unmistakable it carried the weight of language. Your layer is unstable. Correction required. At first that sounded like judgment, perhaps even threat, but the deeper they decoded, the stranger it became. The instability was not moral, not punishment. It referred to something technical in the architecture of emergent space-time near Earth, a growing decoherence, a drift between the human-observed version of physical law and the underlying relational substrate. The planet had become a hot spot where reality's surface was losing alignment with its foundation. The anomalies were not attacks. They were repair attempts. All over the world, people were dying because the universe, or whatever sat beneath it, was trying to re-anchor a slipping layer of existence. Lena felt sick. Human civilization suddenly looked unbearably fragile. Cities, languages, memories, music, grief, love, history. Everything people called real existed on a surface so contingent that a hidden correction process could tear through it without malice, the way a body heals around a splinter. Yet there was something else in the signal, too. Not just correction. A branch. An alternative condition. Adaptive synchronization possible. Mateo leaned over her shoulder. Can we answer it? Lena did not say no. Astor's original experiment had nudged the substrate blindly. But now they had a map, a grammar, a chance, maybe, to tell the deeper framework that the unstable layer it was correcting contained conscious beings who could cooperate. That erasing a mismatch in gravitational consistency would also erase children, coastlines, voices, all the soft local things a substrate could not infer from mass energy equations alone. They repurposed the entire facility. Power reserves, satellite uplinks, decommissioned superconductors, the Greenland Array, Japanese neutrino tunnels, lunar ranging stations. Every system capable of phase-coherent timing was folded into one improvised instrument, not to send a broadcast into space, but to write a pattern into the substructure beneath space, nor calibrated for planetary density compensation. Mateo synchronized the clocks to a level usually reserved for tests no one expected to survive. Yara built the translation layer, transforming the recursion of the message into a reciprocal form. And Lena chose what to say by choosing what relationships to preserve. Not language, not symbols, dependency, continuity, conscious persistence. A declaration that sentience was not noise riding on physical law, but one of its valid outcomes. That a stable reality for thinking beings required more than mechanical consistency. It required history to remain connected to itself. At 3:12 Universal Time Coordinated, they initiated the sequence. Nothing exploded. No alarm screamed. No beam shot into the sky. The only visible change was on a global map, where the red and blue gravity zones stopped expanding. Then, one by one, they softened. The lethal high-gravity valleys eased first. The low-gravity districts thickened back toward normal. Clock drift narrowed. Resonance decayed. Around the planet, people who had spent a week waiting for ground to betray them felt, gradually, that wait had become trustworthy again, not identical to before. Lena saw that immediately. The baseline values had shifted by fractions too small for anyone outside the field to notice, but the new equilibrium was astonishingly stable. The reply came 7 minutes later. The detectors registered it as a final nested pulse, brief and perfectly ordered. Yara translated the structure, then sat back with tears in her eyes. What does it mean? Nora asked. Yara looked at Lena, letting her say it. Lena watched the live data settle into its new coherence, the Earth no longer scraping against a hidden lattice, but resting within it differently than before. It means, she said very softly, we were never living at the bottom of reality. We were living on a version of it. Outside, Icelandic dawn was beginning to thin the horizon into silver. Somewhere across the world, children were stepping out into streets where balls fell normally, where cups stayed on tables, where parents would spend years trying to explain the week when gravity changed its mind. Governments would bury pieces of the truth. Religions would absorb others. Markets would recover. Science would fracture, then rebuild around a deeper and far more unsettling foundation. Lena knew none of that would be the same now. Because once you discover that gravity is not a rule but a negotiation, the universe can never again feel silent. Weeks later, the official story would call it a transient geophysical relativistic event under investigation. It would satisfy almost no one. Too many instruments had recorded too much. Too many survivors had felt their bodies become arguments between competing versions of physics. The old certainty was gone. At Astor, they kept the final signal sealed at the highest level, though Lena doubted secrecy would survive the century. She listened to its translated structure alone sometimes, not because it was comforting, but because it was honest. The hidden thing beneath reality had not introduced itself, and had not claimed divinity, ownership, or mercy. It had simply acknowledged adaptation, a layer becoming self-aware, a surface speaking back to its source. And in the quiet hours before dawn, Lena found herself returning to the same impossible thought. Maybe the deepest mystery was not that reality had a foundation beneath it. Maybe the deepest mystery was that, for one brief and catastrophic week, that foundation noticed the fragile lives assembled on its surface and chose not to smooth them away. The world called it the Gravity Week, as if naming it small could contain it. But Lena understood what had really happened. Humanity had stumbled into first contact, not with aliens crossing space, but with the architecture that made space possible. And the architecture, after examining the trembling creatures living inside one unstable corner of its design, had made room. Not much room, not safety, not answers, just enough room to continue. For now, that was more miraculous than certainty. And every morning after, when Lena set a pen on her desk and watched it remain exactly where she left it, she felt the same strange combination of gratitude and unease. Because weight no longer seemed ordinary. It felt like permission. Thumbnail concept. A split-image Earth with glowing red and blue gravity zones. Cars floating above one city, while people are crushed to the ground in another, and a lone female scientist in the foreground staring at a transparent lattice grid, phasing through the planet.